Now, coming on to stage, the future of philanthropy with Jim Hubbard, John Levy, and Emily Mwaja, moderated by Barbara Soderlin.
How's my sound level? Okay, great. We need our handheld microphones back. Thank you, Natalia. Is there another one? Over here. Here you go, Emily. All right. This is exciting. Okay, I'm Barbara Soderlin. I'm proud to serve as the Director of Advancement for the Nebraska Journalism Trust, the publisher of the awesome Flatwater Free Press, and really appreciate these guests joining us this afternoon for a conversation about the future of philanthropy. You can see their names on the screen, but we have John Levy, President of the William and Ruth Scott Foundation, Emily Mwaja, Director of Capacity Building at the Sherwood Foundation, and Jim Hubbard, Vice President of Programs at Sherwood. So these are two of the largest and best known foundations in a city and community really known for philanthropy. I should mention that they're both funders of our work at the Flatwater Free Press too. But yes, Omaha has a long tradition of philanthropy. I had some family members in town this summer, and it's like, oh, should we go to the Durham Museum or the Dorley Zoo or the Lead Lodge, right? We're very fortunate to live in a place with so much investment. But this is a time of change when the ground is in some ways shifting underneath of us in philanthropy. There's a lot of additional demand right now on nonprofits amid federal and state funding cuts. There's economic uncertainty. Nationwide, these are challenges. And these two foundations and several of their peers here in Omaha are themselves on the brink of major changes. So we'll talk about how this could lead to shifts in the arts, education, social services. I'll start with John Levy and ask you to tell us the story of the Scott Foundation, of who are Bill and Ruth, and why is the foundation talking about sunsetting? What does sunsetting mean?
Yeah, so there's two Scott families in Omaha that are unrelated, and I think it's endlessly confusing for people because they're both very generous. So the family I work for, Bill Scott, was a early employee of Berkshire Partnership. They bought stock in Berkshire, and it did very, very well. I think a newspaper once said that their money was a happy accident. But I would say they were more strategic with their investments than that. The foundation's been around since the late 1990s. Bill Scott passed away about a year and a half ago. Ruth Scott is still living. They grew up in Ashland, Nebraska, when it was a small town, truly separated from Omaha and Lincoln. And when they joined the Giving Pledge, which was for very high net worth individuals, set up by Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, Ruth Scott said, money's like manure. It's only good if you spread it. And since then, they just want to do good. Honestly, that's their goal. They just want to do good and do good for Nebraskans. And donor intent carries the day, right? And so we have a sunset clause. When I started helping the family a little over 10 years ago, I'll be as transparent as possible. Our sunset clause at that time was 15 years. If you look at what's happened with Berkshire stock, it's done quite well. So we've extended the sunset to 20 years after Ruth Scott passes. All the money has to be gone. Our goal in setting a sunset clause is Bill and Ruth were not overly prescriptive with how they wanted their money used. But they thought today's money should be used for today's problems. And so our goal is just to support the great work happening throughout the state. I do meet with about 1,000 nonprofits a year. The Scotts fund about 300 of those organizations. Gifts can range anywhere from $10,000 to 8-figure gifts. I would say probably 95% plus of our giving is done through unrestricted operating gifts. So we believe in trusting our partners, our nonprofit partners, and they know best about how to use their money. So we also, good or bad for them, most of them don't actually fill out a grant application. The only requirement for funding is to meet with me annually. And after several years of organizations not meeting with us, we will eventually cut them off, and the family will tease me and say stuff like, are you that intolerable and insufferable that they will literally not take $250,000 because they can't stand you for 60 minutes? So I guess that's the case. But yes, we are trying to just be responsive to what we are hearing are the needs of communities, and really listening to folks that frankly know better than us about what communities need and what people need.
Thank you. Similarly to your plan, Sunset, and speaking of Warren Buffett, Buffett has said that he doesn't believe in dynastic wealth, right? And that while he wants to leave his wealth to his children to make philanthropic decisions about, that he doesn't want to see their philanthropies linger on and on into the future. And that's one philosophy. Other, foundations have different philosophies. But tell us more about, we reported, and I want to point out that the Flatwater Free Press had a nice series this past year in collaboration with the Chronicle of Philanthropy, looking at organizations that are sunsetting and what could that mean for Nebraska philanthropy. But what do we know about what will happen eventually with the passing of Warren Buffett, and how his assets could flow to Sherwood and to Nebraska?
Great question. Yes, so that will happen. I think at some point in time. I think I definitely have to give a shout out to Jeremy Turley and his coverage through the Flatwater Free Press for the Donating Buffett's Billions article that he wrote. I believe it was December of last year, and like you mentioned, Barbara, co-published in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I mean, that was just incredible coverage with quotes, I think, from the family. If you haven't checked it out yet, I read it again last night to kind of refresh myself a bit in preparation for today, but I think it's just such a dynamic article, and that it says what the truth is today, and that's, we don't really know what that looks like, when that will be, how that's going to happen. I think there's so many moving targets and different, elements that come into play with that. One being stock price, historically that has improved year over year. Something that may or may not be well known. The Sherwood Foundation gets a transfer of Berkshire stock, one time a year, and that's our goal, is to spend that money and distribute that in the community, in the Omaha metro, throughout the state of Nebraska, and in some other places. In a given year, we don't sit on a large sum of money that gets larger and give some of that out. So I think that there will be a similar thing that happens at some point in time, when Warren passes. But I think that we don't know the entirety of those details, until that happens. So I think Emily and I, working for the foundation, are excited about the opportunity, and really just the extended, given timeline to continue to listen and learn from folks that are doing the work, making an impact for multiple people, because it's so important, and we are one small piece of a 1,000 or sometimes a 10,000 piece puzzle to make things happen.
Yeah. Like you said, you don't know exactly how that scenario will unfold, but we have reported that, it's conceivable that the Sherwood Foundation could be the recipient of really tens of billions of dollars here that in the coming decade, and or years after that. How do you balance, and what kind of questions do you get from nonprofits that you support? Because I'm sure they're thinking, yes, we're so grateful for the support today, but gosh, I'm imagining a future where there could be a lot more resources on the table. And how are you balancing like those future planning scenarios in the conversations you're having with the organizations you support?
Yes, I appreciate that question as well. It's something I think when Warren Buffett went public with this announcement, I believe it was about a year or so ago, last summer, there, as you can imagine, our phone lines and email inboxes and info at sherwoodfoundation.com saw a bit of a spike in traffic, believe it or not. And So I like to both individually with leaders at these nonprofits and folks that are inquiring, just have an open, honest, and transparent conversation with folks, and that's because that's what Susie encourages us to do at Sherwood. So we're fortunate to have a leader in that, but I think, again, it's an opportunity to be like, I know you've seen the article that tens of billions of dollars may which I'm laughing because it's still to me as an individual is an pretty insane number, but just we don't have that yet. What that looks like, it is heavily reliant on stock, which is something that is outside of our individual control, and that could differ, the timing of other things. Again, because it's stock, I don't think it will be an entire lump sum at one time, similar to how Sherwood Giving has been set up to this point in time. I don't think it will be one transfer of the bank account and then we have a ticking timeline within a year to get rid of something like that. So again, I think it allows us the opportunity to do what the foundation has done since I thought that it started in 2006 with Warren's letter to his 3 children. I learned recently it actually started in 2000. So, over 25 years now, and that's meeting with individuals that are doing the work and getting an opportunity to listen and learn from them and continue to be impactful with some large funds, which is great for the Omaha community and great for the Nebraska community.
So Emily, in your role as Director of Capacity Building, right, you're helping the nonprofits that Sherwood serves, and you're helping them build capacity. What does that mean, and why is it important that Sherwood work with nonprofits to help them be more effective and resilient?
Thank you for the question. So I'm the newbie on the foundation side, been at Sherwood Foundation for about 9 months now. My role as capacity building is centered on equipping nonprofits with tools, strategies, and support systems to kind of help them thrive and stay in their communities, and especially at this time with the ever-changing rapid environment. And so what I'm tasked with is I meet with a lot of executive directors and kind of listen to their pain points, because every nonprofit, Sherwood serves nonprofits from every genre, from arts to housing to after school to immigration, mental health, name it. I've been around the community in the nonprofit sector for 20 plus years between Girls Inc. and the Luminarium. So I was on the other side of asking for dollars from Jim and John, right? And so being on this other side, I'm kind of seeing how this sausage is made and actually seeing the impact these foundations make to communities that are really essential fabric to where we live in across the state of Nebraska. So once I meet with the nonprofit executives and hear about their pain points, I'm able to kind of discuss on what does that need look like. I put my little notes because, like I said, I'm still new, so I have to make sure that I'm very clear what capacity means. Capacity doesn't mean that you're not getting your operations or your programming or capital dollars from the foundation because you're getting capacity. So our support looks like operational support. How can we help improve your nonprofit with systems in finance, in HR, in governance, in grant writing, in copywriting? What does it look like for to meet with an executive director that might need an executive coach or leadership coaching for your team? Because we know that as a nonprofit, they're very different from being in corporate. So how do we support that executive director? Maybe have that bench, deep bench. So what does your number 2 and number 3 look like? So capacity can help support with kind of leadership training, leadership skills for that executive director. We also help support with strategic planning. And when we talk about strategic planning, we try to make sure that the strategic planning comes from a place that is that strategic plan is adaptable and is equity driven, right? So, and then we also kind of support with resource development so that the nonprofit is not only relying on a single fund stream. So how do we support maybe a grant writing school or school for the nonprofit for more than just the executive director to help with fundraising? What does that look like? A lot of nonprofit leaders wear so many hats all day. And like I mentioned, I know this because I just lived it for a while. So capacity building is not a nice to have, it is essential. Because if these nonprofits don't have the dollars to be able to have strategies, to take time to look at their systems and their planning, then their mission is not safe for the future, right? So what would communities look like if that support is not there? So as this new role at Sherwood, I know that the return on investment is gonna be huge in the future. And especially, again, going back to after COVID and what society looks like now, those needs are gonna grow. They're gonna get larger and not smaller. So if we can build infrastructure, support leadership growth, kind of look into the future, I think that's gonna be the key support of making sure those basic needs are met in the communities we serve across the state.
That's so interesting, right? So you're not just supporting individual programs or nonprofits, but you're really investing in them to help them do more, be more successful, be more resilient, and do more with the grants that you're giving.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
And my colleagues could jump in here since they've been in the field for a longer time. And I feel since COVID, we know things can change at any moment. So what does that look like? How can we set up a nonprofit with supports that can help them pivot and be flexible with the changes that are coming? What does that look like? What does strategy look like in being able to, if the need is greater at this time and moment, you're able to do that? What does a strategic plan look like if you need to kind of bring it back in and still keep supporting your community? So, yeah.
So for John then, so with the Scott Foundation looking to sunset within that 20 years, after your founder's passing, what do you feel, do you similarly invest in capacity building, or do you feel you have a responsibility then to help some of your nonprofits into the future?
Yeah, I think that's why we try to give unrestricted operating support, is so then nonprofits don't feel, now we tell nonprofits you can either get an unrestricted operating gift, and in order to do that you just have to meet with me, or you can apply for a program grant. And that one you actually have to fill out an application. So we're letting them decide. It's an either or. And part of that reason is we don't want nonprofits to think they have to do something new and creative in order to get our dollars. They can just keep staying the course, and they're going to get our support. Also, that annual meeting requirement, before we meet, I'm going to ask for things like, give me your last year's projected versus actual budget. The reason I'm asking for that, frankly, is I met with an organization that 2 years ago, their budget was just over $200,000 in revenue. Last year was just shy of $2 million was what they projected. They raised about $220,000. What that told me is they had one person that put together that budget. They probably did not have a very engaged finance committee. I'm also going to ask for a major donor list with amounts. Why am I asking for that? Because I want you to be able to tell any one of us to pound sand. And if you have one donor who makes up too much of your budget, you have to listen to them too much. And just because I ran one nonprofit, and frankly, I couldn't run that nonprofit today, does not mean I'm an expert in every organization. So I just want to make sure that the nonprofit knows where they want to go, which is why I'm also asking for a strategic plan with progress made. Because if you're an urban garden and I just happen to mention, have you ever thought about doing mentoring? And we're 50% of your budget, they might be like, yeah, well, actually, we've always thought we wanted to do mentoring. And then I ask for any outcomes and outputs you have. Why? I'm just curious how you're deciding if you're doing a good job. You're dedicating a portion of your lives to doing this work. I want to decide that tells me a lot of how you're valuing your work. And I will tell you what, to me, everything Emily said about the capacity building, that's what I do pay way more attention to, honestly. Because no organization have I ever met with has asked for money for something, no one has a bad mission. No one's come to the Scotts and said, hey, we want to traffic babies, or we want to traffic drugs. Give us money, right? Everyone has a noble mission, but can you execute on that mission? Do you have a properly involved board of directors? Do you have functioning committees? Do you have diverse funding? So by having that annual meeting, after I get those documents, I do a memo to file, and then we'll talk. And we look at it as a relationship. Like, in truth be told, I am strictly the middle person, right? It's not my money, and so that's not my generosity, and it's not me doing the hard work. So it's not that generosity of that side. I'm just playing the matchmaker, right? And I get to be the ultimate observer to all this incredible generosity on both sides. Both sides need each other. And so when we're meeting, I'm not trying to get you in any sort of things. I just want to have a conversation. And I remember how it was to be at a nonprofit and to have a foundation say, hey, we want to have that honest conversation, and then I'd apply for a grant, and then we wouldn't get the grant, and one of the reasons was because of one of the challenges I told them that we were having. So it's like, note to self, don't be honest with that foundation ever again. And so we don't want to have that. We really see ourselves as partners in the work, and it's not just about did you achieve a certain outcome or have a certain output. Because frankly, I think nonprofits get too much of the credit and too much of the blame if something doesn't work out. Like high school graduation rates, great if a nonprofit wants to track that. I'm not saying that they shouldn't track that. But that youth family, the teachers, they all play a part in that kid's graduation too. So I think attribution is just difficult. And so to us, it's easy to get focused on the programming piece, but there's so much more to being a sustainable nonprofit. And that's why when we think about the fact that we're going to sunset, if you're relying on 3 or 4 foundations and we go away, then what? Now we've left it to our peer donors. That's why we even say stuff like celebrate your failings. If you reached out to a donor and they told you no, that doesn't mean we're going to say no. We appreciate that you've tried. Now, if they've told you no, I see Trey Berkshire up there. I'll use Trey as an example. If Logier's told you no 8 times, I would hope that you would probably get the point that it's not a fit with Logier Foundation. So I'm going to say, at some point in time, also learn if some organization or some foundation is not a fit. But I would say for us, we appreciate that you've made that effort. And just because the Scotts have a good amount of money doesn't mean that we don't value that donor that can give you $10. We appreciate every single person that supports your work. And that is just as important to us as, frankly, as if Sherwood is investing in something.
Thinking of a future where some of the leading foundations have sunsetted, and besides yours, we've reported that the Peter Kiewit Foundation plans a sunset, the Holland Foundation. Is our community ready? Are there any signs that the Omaha community relies too much on philanthropy? And I guess, what does that mean for our arts, culture, human services organizations? That is an open question.
I'll take a first go at that and then pass it off here quickly. But again, just to use an example, I grew up here in Omaha, and there was kind of one foundation here in town. It was the Peter Kiewit Foundation, and if something was happening, they were likely involved in one capacity or another. And so I think for them to again, through great coverage through Flatwater and others, having plans to sunset at a certain time that is again getting near and near on the calendar here as things move forward. I think there's just a lot of opportunity, and what I really want to build off is something that John said just before me, and that's the value of the individual $10. I've traveled both with Emily and John to many communities, across Nebraska, and while no community is the same, the ways that they all get creative and innovative to raise dollars. We are rarely going ever into a community and saying, hey, we think your community really, really needs to do this. We are hearing from them about an exciting project that they've thought of and they've started and they've got, you know, momentum behind it. And, you know, it's everything from, you know, successful farmer and ranchers that are in the community, but it's the power of the individual gift. And I think, you know, a lot of what you see here in Omaha, Barbara, you kicked us off by, you know, the Durham Museum, the Dorley, you know, there are so many things that do have names and big names and recognizable names. But I also think that there's so many that are successful and are able to reach the dollars they need to make the project happen because of the combined individual gift. So I don't know if it's an over reliance on philanthropy as much as I'm optimistic about how that may or may not look differently going into the future. You know, it may be more of the individual. It may be new generations of some of the same families. It may be, you know, new innovators that, you know, are very successful and able to contribute their funds, you know, back to philanthropy in the future. So, yeah, that's what I'll say about that and pass it off here.
Any takers?
I mean, I would say I'm bold about Omaha's future, and I think everyone knows the big names, but I think that there's so many unsung heroes that are doing incredible things in our community. We just don't know their names, or they only have the capacity to give one significant gift. And I think about my time at Heart Ministry Center, and it was my second year, and we had no money, and was legitimately thinking about, do I take out another loan on our house? How do we make this work? And I gave a family from rural Nebraska a tour of our center, and they told me a little bit about themselves. It still makes me emotional thinking about it, because they said, hey, at the end they just said, thank you for what you do. We had 4 kids, and we wish they could have had a dignified experience coming to a food pantry like this. Sometimes the only place our kids got to eat was one meal at school, and the worst times were the summers because they didn't have food. And I said, thanks a lot, that means a lot. And then the next day they called me up and said, hey, we're going to send you a check in the mail. Will you let us know when you got it? And that was a Wednesday. On Thursday, they called me up. They said, you get that check yet? And I said, no. And then Friday, they called me up again. They're like, you get that check? I was like, sorry, I wasn't in the office today. I was like thinking, okay, I will let you know. I told you I'd let you know. So Saturday, I went to the office, and we had a small mentoring program, so I was picking up kids. And as I was picking up kids, I was opening the mail. I'm stopped at off the interstate down at Highway 370, and I open up this envelope, and there's a check for $30,000 from this family. At the time, our budget was $100,000 at the Heart Ministry Center. So I just pulled over and started crying, because I knew what that was going to allow us to do for families, and it was going to allow us to stay operational. That family has never asked for any sort of praise, any sort of recognition, and I think that there are so many families like that in Omaha and throughout this state. So yes, we know of the big money, and we hear about that big money, but there are so many people doing incredible things, and that's why I'm, bold on the future of Omaha.
Emily, in your experience also, right, working with a nonprofit organization, what were some of the ways then that you were working? Do you have any similar experiences, sharing with some of your supporters, or just, what are you seeing?
Yes, and I can start with a story, actually. Just traveling with Jim a couple of months ago, and I have 2 stories, one Omaha. But this was my first time in Neely, Nebraska, which I did not know where it was. But it's a cute little town, and actually when we got there, I did not know what to expect. And meeting with some of the families and folks who are really into making their community better and bringing it back, they want to bring back this movie theater, which which also serves as a convenient space for our kids, for families, whatever that might look like. So these high school kids took upon themselves to write to the newspaper and rally in their community because, Jim, you could correct me if I'm wrong at this, but I want to say the last time the kids in that community saw a movie in a movie theater were like seniors. So these are high school kids who have grown up in that town with that experience, which to me, I was like, oh my God, you take that for granted where you are. But so these communities had already started to do the work themselves, and not the older generation, but the younger generation. So thinking on, if I'm gonna live here, then my voice matters. How do I mobilize my community, my age, my people, and everybody else to come together to bring something back? So when we went and we met in that community, I could see, yes, folks are not just waiting for philanthropy to come save them, right? They are actually putting in the work intentionally and thinking through not just for today, but for tomorrow. So that's something that I've seen as I've traveled with Jim across the state. The other part is when I was at Girls Inc., we are a big nonprofit, a national nonprofit. But when we did our capital campaign to expand our space, the community, so we had an idea of, fine, we are going to ask dollars from the big foundations, but we also want the community where we live in, the families, to feel like they are putting in their part because this is for them. And so we had a fun campaign of the girls, if you could donate even $1, your name will be on the wall in this new building. And when I tell you families, girls who are first grade, second grade, they're like, I brought my dollar, put my name down. And then their families started giving. Alumni who do not live here but went through Girls Inc. heard about it, and they send us checks, There was an engineer, who lived in Denver. She sent us a $5,000 check. I heard that my name could be on there and the impact. So I think there are ways to where I have seen that happen, and ways to where even the younger generation that's coming forward are thinking of ways to keep supporting that. So I'm really hopeful and optimistic that that's going to continue as a support and as a way of thinking.
That's really inspiring to hear. Thank you. And that's a really good point, that there are so many organizations, that reminded me of the work that the Nebraska Community Foundation does in supporting hometowns. There's so many organizations that are investing in people who want to become philanthropists, right? Like the Omaha Community Foundation trains advisors, like financial advisors, so that when you go to do your estate plan, they're going to ask you, do you want to include philanthropy in your will? The 5 to Thrive campaign, donor advised funds are becoming more and more popular for everyday giving. Omaha Community Foundation has giving circles. The university has giving circles. So there's this big movement, it feels like, to get everyday people engaged in philanthropy. What do you guys see as you're all traveling the state and meeting with these 1,000 nonprofits a year that will take a meeting with John? What are some of the emerging needs in Nebraska? We heard from a panel about the future of Nebraskans. I think one of the next panels looks at the future of our economy. How are the needs across Nebraska changing that philanthropists could look for an opportunity to make an impact?
We repeatedly hear there's a need around early childhood, care, development, education, housing, not just affordable housing, all housing, and then there's workforce development. Every community is unique, and we hear about different needs of different communities. You hear about movie theaters. How do we keep amenities local so we can have, kids when they graduate high school or graduate college stay in our hometown long term? But those are three that we hear pretty consistently. But we'll hear other ones, but I'd say those are the three that we hear most commonly.
I could add another one, which transportation, and that has been what I've heard while I was in the nonprofit sector, and even now with some of the folks that we meet with, transportation is an issue. Access to technology, which you would think like that maybe was kind of solved or easy, but access to technology to families and people who are not affluent or living in technology deserts.
Yeah, ditto what both of these folks said, that the housing and early childhood education piece, I think, are just so huge. And, what an opportunity to invest in your community, to start, with the youngest, set them up for success. But it's so much bigger than that, too. It allows people to go to work and continue to contribute in their own ways. And I just think that we're fortunate in Nebraska and Omaha to have really awesome initiatives around all of these needs that have a lot of momentum to continue to make positive impact going forward. Calling back to one of the first panelists here today, the mayor, I think, talked about a super exciting opportunity for continued, housing here in Omaha and what can be done for that. So I just ditto both of these folks, and there's exciting stuff happening all around those.
Great. Well, we're coming up to, I guess, the end of our panel. I want to thank my guests very much for a great conversation about philanthropy. So we'll say thank you. And then we now have a break. So we'll take about a 20-minute break. And I think the slide here will tell you what's coming up next. After our break, we'll have a choice of two panels. One is a breakout. The room number on there is wrong. Do not go to room 2058 for the Legacy of Lead panel. Please go next door to that to room 2057. And we'll have a great conversation about some really interesting reporting that our team is doing about lead in the soil in Omaha and what the legacy is there. And then in this room, your option is the future of the economy, which I suppose ties into our philanthropy conversation. So thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you back in about 20 minutes.